The Houston Cougars start fast and come out to a big offensive production kind of game, exactly like we all predicted, right?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, and whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who can't stop by, thank you for making us your first listen post-game, first listen next morning, anywhere in between. We appreciate you on the most listened to Houston Cougars show out there, and being Locked On Podcast Network, the most listened to podcast network, sports podcast network in the world. If you want to join the conversation down below and you don't know what to say, we're having a lot of fun at Bobby Hurley's expense tonight, so chime in and chip away at that as well. I noticed he didn't have the Guard U hoodie on. Feels like he knew better than that. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We'll get more in on the action with that later, but I want to talk some about this game and starting fast for these two Cougars, this offense, controlling the conference, getting ready for Texas Tech, and also a section or so of some Nightcaps being passed out. Lots of things to get into here, but if you are tuning in late, missed the 5:30 tip, or in traffic after wherever you're watching the Houston Texans game, and we're going to call that a game, and that's all we're going to say about that. I will say that this game felt over very early. Houston jumped out to a 28-5 lead. They had 7 points in the first 70 seconds. It was turnover make. It was all kinds of very like Houston's playing at a different speed, pace, tempo. Arizona State did not feel ready. As that went on, Houston obviously did some back and forth there as the second half started, but really controlled the majority of this game, up by as many as 33, won by 30. There was a stretch there in the mid-second half where it shrunk down to 13. Houston had a few turnovers against a three-quarter court defense or press-ish kind of look, but honestly, that was more about like not knowing it was coming, I think, than anything. Houston looks very, very clean and crisp from start to finish. I think a big part of that was honestly, and I'm not typically the toot my own horn guy. Cenac took advantage of his matchup in a way that really kind of ignited this team, because Arizona State very quickly was like, oh God, what do we do? What do we do here? Right. There's a big guy at Arizona State. I want to make sure you can pronounce Santiago Truitt. He's 6'11". He's a big, strong guy, but he was the one assigned to cover Cenac, and he's typically much more of an around the rim kind of guy. And we talked throughout the week in our preview of this game that like if Houston goes 4 out or gets Cenac on the wing, that's going to pull a rim defender away. And what Arizona State opted not to do was they didn't pull the rim defender away. They just left Cenac open. He had a couple early threes. He then back cut a late defense. Like he catches the ball, so the defense comes out, it overextends, and he goes right past it for an easy dunk. Chris was really able to get things going early in this game. Credit also to Kingston Flemings, who had 6 first-half assists in kind of helping that jump start for the Cougs, kind of orchestrating things. Starting to see him and Milos come into more of a playing together kind of relationship, and it's really nice to see that play out this way. Kingston did lead Houston in points by the end of the night, had a couple nice attacks of the rim in the second half. He had one attempted dunk in the first half where I thought he was going to send that young man home. He like cocked it way back as he went up on the rim, or went up towards the rim, cocked it way back like behind his. He has all that hair behind his hair and everything, and it ended up like throwing over the top of the rim or whatever as they didn't go in and all that. I think there was a foul call. It was true. Like I was like, oh man, like that kind of special athleticism you don't get to see very, very often. I think it's worth pointing out that JoJo Tugler kept a mostly clean sheet tonight against a active and big 7-footer. A big part of what Arizona State was able to do to Arizona the other night was go through Masam Diop, and he's 7'1", he's 230, he shoots threes, does a lot of things. JoJo Tugler was able to contain that without getting into foul trouble. I think that needs, as much as we come down hard on Tugler when he is not able to do that. We probably need to make sure we pat him on the back when he is able to do that. Emmanuel Sharp did Emmanuel Sharp things. He had a stretch of 5 or 6 minutes where I felt like he wasn't going to miss. He did get in foul trouble late himself, but that's, Houston Cougars are going to always have someone do that, I think, over the course of this season. Impressive start to the game. They had first half, Houston had the most points they've had in a half all season in the first half of this game. You also saw Houston have, it was 56 points, and they had only one person over 10 points. It was a very even spread attack in the first half. Arizona State could not get a pulse on where things were coming from. And I don't know which assistant. So the way Kelvin does games, especially conference games, they divide up. And because you play some of these in such quick turnarounds, different assistants will get the lead scout on whatever. So, someone will get, Casey will get this one, so-and-so will get that one. And generally speaking, he kind of gives, tougher matchups typically to Kellen or whatever. But I don't know who got the scout on the staff for this night. But what they clearly did was whenever Arizona State is on defense, they couldn't figure out where the attack was coming from. And what that seemed to do is kind of almost make them, it felt like on TV for a minute, they gave up. It felt like Arizona State was just not into okay, if they're all going to score, we're just not going to do this anymore. And it really felt like it was an effective way to kind of take them out of their game early on. Now, admittedly, that's a very obvious, okay, it made them quit, whatever, right? But I think that ultimately what could translate from that is Houston's now put on video, all 5 starters can break 15 points. I guess technically JoJo had 12 tonight, but we've seen him break 15 before. And that's, pick your poison at its finest. Now, part of that's because they got all these, fast break points out in transition, forced the turnovers, etc. But I don't think it's just that. I do think there was some conscious effort in this game to kind of spread the ball around a little bit because Chris started out hot. Emmanuel had a hot stretch in the mid-second, or in the early second. Kingston had moments where he could have taken over as well. And it didn't really ever feel like they necessarily had to go to the well for one thing or the other. I do think that when it got down to 13, it's worth pointing out that they went to Kingston drive and attack, kick out to Milos for 3, Kingston drive and attack, get a couple of free throws. That was kind of the I used to talk about what do you hang your hat on? What's your hat rack play? What are you going to go to when you need a bucket, you need to stop the bleeding or whatever? They're in a high screen and roll, backside action, got a hammer screen down in the corner. Play side, he had a kick out to Milos for 3, and in both instances, Houston came with points. It's a quick 5-0 run out of Houston once it got down to 13 off of that. But that's the only indication of any kind of nut crunching kind of time out of Coogs on Sunday night. It did feel like they wanted to intentionally get everyone involved and show off where everyone can score and put on video as they play Texas Tech next weekend. This is the kind of team where everyone can give you 15. You're going to have to cover everybody as they head up to Lubbock. Now, does not hurt to have 44 points in the paint, and it does not hurt to force 17 turnovers, right? Those are force 17 turnovers and 31 points off of those turnovers. That's pretty impressive statistics out of the Houston Cougars. I want to talk about kind of running this conference and running things through Houston in this conference in the second segment. Before we get to that, today's show is brought to you, as mentioned at the top, everybody's over at FanDuel because college football playoffs are here. There's one more game left, and FanDuel is giving all customers even more ways to get in on the action every single game of the playoffs. Because right now, at your college football playoff game day, FanDuel users can get a profit boost waiting for them in the app. Here's what we love about it. You get to use the profit boost on bets that you already feel good about. Ride with the favorites, take the underdog, build a parlay around different players and moments, and apply that profit boost to get even bigger winnings. And when you win, FanDuel pays out instantly, which is perfect for playoff football. FanDuel's the best place to get in the action all playoff long. So visit FanDuel.com. Get your playoff profit boost every single game day. Parker Rangers Locked on Cougs here, and thank you for making Locked on Cougs your first listen of the post game, first listen the next day, or anywhere in between, and making Locked on Sports Podcast Network the number one sports podcast network in the world. If you haven't already checked it out and you want more, check out the Everydayer Club. Access to ad-free audio, members-only Discord server, all-access episodes, one-on-one texting with me, all kinds of ways to get more locked on Cougs. So to lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer, or if you want to just get with the Cougs and go, you don't need to know any more about it, to lockedoncougs.supercast.com. Speaking of which, some listeners mentioned we go back and forth. We're texting questions during the game. I like to give those folks their credit and post those in the show with little graphics here. So we got one. Why do I always say regress to the mean? And it was interesting because early in this game, it felt like Houston. What I mean by that is that eventually you end up shooting your average, right? That's kind of the way math works. And so early in this game, Houston was shooting lights out, and it felt like they could not miss in the first 10 minutes. Then there was that stretch where it was like, the shots won't go in, this offense is terrible, blah, 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 in the mid-second half. When really, that's happening over the course of the same game. And so when I say Houston's regressing to the mean, I mean that if you're hot in the first half, there is a good chance you're going to cool down at some point in the second half. Like, those things happen. That does not mean the sky is falling, does not mean the shots aren't working, does not mean the offense is not good, does not mean that something's got to be dramatically fixed or changed. It just means that ultimately, as good as Houston started this game, they're always going to come back down to and be they shot 56% from the field in this game, a strong 48% from three in this game as well. Milos and Chris kind of led the way on that one. I think Harwell chipped in with a couple, yeah. And so what you see there is like, okay, what that means is they might have a bad three-point shooting night next week against Tech. That doesn't mean that they got better or worse shots. That just means that their average is their average for a reason, right? I also think it's worth pointing out that regressing the mean can also work the other way. If you miss all of your shots in the first 10 minutes, but they're good quality shots you typically get, that probably means that eventually they're going to start going in because your percentages are your percentages for a reason. If you play the long game on that, just keep getting the good quality shots. Other question came in, said why where the second half turnovers come from. They've had 3 in a row. I think that stopped at 3 in a row. We mentioned earlier that Kingston went into kind of a little takeover mode there. I think that the second half turnovers are interesting because it felt like Arizona State switched up their defense into more of a three-quarter court, a little more ball pressure, a little less help side, and led less skip passes and so on. I watched a couple Arizona State games, get ready for this one. I don't want to act like the expert of Arizona State. I like the guys over at PHNX for what it's worth. I don't think they've done that a whole lot. And I say that more because of Houston's reaction to it, right? So when Arizona State came in that three-quarter, I guess, quasi-press look, Houston kind of got across the half-court line a little bit later than normal, got in their offense a little bit later than normal, and felt rushed in the half-court offense. They didn't actually turn it over in the full-court part of that very often, but they felt a little rushed in the half-court offense. And I think that's mostly a function of, like, okay, what are we going to do now? We get down here. Arizona State also had length and things like that on the floor at that time. And so you got a smaller lineup on there because Chase is playing the 4. I think it was Chase and Ramon in the game at the same time. So you have a little bit less ball handling too. And I don't actually think I'm that concerned about it because ultimately Houston was able to attack, correct, fix. And down here we got Uzan played so well as a comment. And I would point out that it felt like when they put that starting lineup back in after this lead had kind of shrunk, he really had a lot of right the ship kind of confidence. And it's also interesting. This is not a planned segment part of this. Houston got into Big 12 play last year, and Uzan had a big step forward from coming in the offseason, missing part of it with a broken nose, playing poorly in some of the non-conference games bluntly last year. And then he had a conference play where he was leading the team on the eventual charge towards the national championship game, right? It feels like we're kind of weirdly in a similar trajectory. He didn't miss part of the offseason hurt, but he did it to adjust to another new position, playing with another new point guard. And now we're, a few games into conference play. It's, second half of January, and Milos is back to being Milos. He had 16 points on 11 shots, 4 of 7 from 3 in this one. And I would also point out there were a couple of those, like that one was just a 13-point lead, was kind of like a timely three at that. Impressive from him for sure. I thought he played phenomenal. I thought it was a good point by John here to say that. The other question I got texted in for the Everyday All Access Club that I wanted to bring up here was that should we be worried about how many points we're giving up in the second half? And I think I got a very similar question. I have to go back and look after Houston played Arkansas, where Houston had another high-scoring game against Arkansas. I was like, wait, but we gave up a bunch of points. Shouldn't we be worried about that? And I think this is another one of those moments where you're working through freshmen, you're learning through freshmen. You got a bunch of young guys on the court, and that also means that you're going to have some like I don't mean to say like they check out when they get up by a lot or whatever, but I do think that when you're up by 30 and 35, it's easy to kind of not have your foot quite as hard on the gas, right? And so you may see that with younger players more than older players. And I can tell you right now that staff is harping more on that 10 or 12 minutes of not so great basketball and film tomorrow morning than they are on basically the other 30 minutes of the game, right? That's going to be how you continue to grow and watch these young guys develop. Ultimately, too, I would point out like Arizona State did score 73 points. Now I want to make sure I'm not wrong on this. But Arizona State is not they're a 10-7 basketball team. I don't know that I would necessarily say I guess now they're 10-8. I don't know that I would necessarily say that they're a bad basketball team. You start looking at some of the teams they've played and played close on the season. Arizona State, let me make sure I got this right, is averaging 82 points per game. So you still held them 10 points below their average on the season, even in your like we had a bad second half kind of deal there. You turn over a few times since in the foul line a whole lot. They had a big free throw advantage. And some of that was ticky-tack. Some of that was also get your hands out, stop going for steals and play the shot clock and that kind of stuff. The free throw discrepancy was, let me see, they shot 24 on the game. I think at one point they had 15 more in the second half than Houston did. And I think that really played more into the way that the second half there played out between Houston and between Houston and Arizona State as far as like being a more competitive second half all of a sudden out of nowhere. Now, this offense, and John chime in again, good comment on John, love the offense running at a fast pace. I think Kingston and Milos are actually playing really well together at a higher clip pace. I think Kingston's probably more suited for a high fast pace. And I think that's where he'd rather play, right? Is at a faster paced offense. And Houston has shown ability to play at a lot of different speeds. And I think that's kind of a strength of this team is we can play at whatever speed we need to play at, right? And so that's going to be part of it. As far as what offenses they're running with him, I think it's interesting that a lot more of Kingston's looks have been from the true point guard spot, and Milos has really moved completely into, and their half court offense, a lot more of that two guard spot, a lot more from the corner coming up on curls, a lot more from the corner attacking on kickouts. He still gets to his floater. We know it's a big weapon of what Milos brings, but his secondary role is really becoming true half court, even offense secondary role. Kingston's kind of it's working out well for both guys, frankly. Houston's winning a lot of games with it. Now, this was Arizona State, and they are 10-8, and you play who you play, and it's a conference game. It's the first time Houston's broken 100 in a conference game. This will get more difficult. The conference is more difficult. They got a more difficult game next weekend. They have a stretch later this season that is truly as daunting as any stretch for anyone in America. And I want to talk about what that looks like in a second. But before we get there, this show is brought to you by everybody, like I said, over at FanDuel, America's #1 Sportsbook, because right now you can get in on the sportsbook action. And today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at TurboTax. Now, tax season doesn't have to just take over your life. It feels like it's going to dominate from now through like April, and it's be every day. What am I doing? What am I doing? But with TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out what forms you got to fill out, how to fill them out, etc., you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app without having to think anything about it yourself. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If your TurboTax expert didn't file your last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. Parker Ainsworth locked on Coogs here. And look, before we get into nightcaps, and we'll give out a couple of those at some point, would stress that now Houston's got until Saturday. I guess they'll probably leave Friday for Lubbock to head to Lubbock and play Tech. And that's a big, big game for this team. Both teams should be, we'll see if Tech quite gets in the top 15 or in the top 10, I should say, on when the rankings come out. They're 15th right now. Houston's 7th. You saw some shakeups ahead of both teams, though, in the top 20. And so things could move around. Iowa State lost a couple, right? Lost Cincinnati for what it's worth. And so Tech will be a formidable opponent. You also have like this budding rivalry you're starting to see build with Texas Tech, both big public schools, both in the state of Texas, old Southwest Conference things, both good at basketball right now, right? They're the only team that beat you in conference play last year, right? Those kinds of things. And so you're going to their place where you did win a year ago for a prime time matchup next Saturday. And frankly, I think it is all focus on that between now and then for the program, obviously. No questions, no workarounds, nothing different there. I will talk throughout the week and previewing that game, but coming out of this one, it's like, how do you feel? Do you feel ready for it? And honestly, I think that was about as perfect a game to go into the Tech week as you could have had. You got in and out healthy, big deal. You got in and out confident. Guys saw the ball go through the basket. You scored 103 points. You know you can score. You got in with a good solid ranking. There's still stakes on this game. Nothing's happened this season to take stakes off of this game, right? You also had stretches like that turnover stretch we talked about in the second half. You had stretches of things where you feel like you can get better. You tried out some new stuff. You got Cenac working on the perimeter more. That's a big deal. You kind of figured out your lineups a little bit more than the first time you played them. Harwell's playing a nice size role off the bench. I think, let me get the minutes right. Harwell played 17 minutes tonight, right? That's a big deal. Khalifa Sacco, 15 minutes tonight. That's a big deal. And I think that it's also worth pointing out that like Sacco was not able to really participate last time. So you got like a little bit more going on here with him as you're going to see. Actually, might just come back, but you're going to see Big JT Toppin, right? And what you're going to do with them. Sammy says Tech is not a rival; they're an annoyance. That's fun. That's fun. It is an annoyance. I will say that it is fun to have these kinds of games in conference play, though, and to have them on a national scale where both teams have little numbers next to their names. And I think Houston comes out of this as prepared as you could realistically be for that game. Having played them once, you're playing better than you were going into that one, right? Going into the Tech game, you had just played Middle Tennessee State to 9 points and Cincinnati to 7 points. Coming out of this week, you just blew out Arizona State. That Cincinnati win looks better because they just beat Iowa State. And again, you're healthy, you're clean, etc. You're feeling like you've got some new stuff going. You figured out your bench depth. I think we understand that this week we have to do something on just like this gritty group. It's Harwell, McCarty, Ramon Walker. Those guys just come in and do all the dirty work. You kind of got that solidified going up to Lubbock, and you need those guys on the road to kind of get some extra loose balls or get some 50-50 balls or whatever for you. So that's pretty solidified. Look, Tech is good. They play Baylor between now and then, and so we'll probably watch that and see what they look like as of most recently. But we also kind of know what they look like, right? I, at this point, still think I'd pick Houston to win a close game up there in Lubbock. It'd be a 2-possession game again, I think, 4 or 5 points or so, kind of like the last one was. But that's the fun of this conference and frankly, this rivalry we got going on here. Now, I know Sammy called it an annoyance, but I'm going to keep calling it that. The super crazy thing, though, is that there's a stretch later that's actually more difficult than this, where you play Kansas State on a Saturday, which think about that as you may, but Tang is a coach that's won some games before. Sampson seemed to have his number, but that's tough. Monday, 2 days later, you got at Iowa State, and then into the next week, you got hosting Arizona, and then the following Monday, you're at Kansas. And I know Kansas has no number next to name right now. If that Peterson guy is playing, they are better than when he's not. And I bet he plays against Houston. That's a tough 4-game stretch there in the second half of February. And that's happening over the course of 9 days. That's remarkably difficult. And so, yes, we got some time to kind of catch some breath and get ready for Tech, and getting ready should be priority. But you also have so many things down the line that catching your breath should be as well. Ryan asked before we get out of here about connectivity on defense. And I do think that the teams to be clicking more on defense. I think you're still seeing freshmen miss some rotations on the backside of stuff. I think the truth is that Chris is so athletic, he can actually cover up some of his miscues on the backside of things. And then Kingston is getting help from playing with veteran guards like Emmanuel and Milos. And Isaiah is just all ball to wall hustle all the time, right? So that's just different roles they all fill here. I think the team is exactly where they need to be for mid-January, and that's where I'm at on that. Now, Nightcaps, we set a nightcap to Kingston, 20 points, 8 assists, 4 rebounds. Pretty strong from the freshman. Chris Cenac had 18 points and 8 rebounds and 5 assists of his own. 3 steals for Chris Cenac. Sneaky perimeter defense there. I'm going to give another one to the other freshman, Isaiah Harwell, for his 8-point effort. A couple threes, a couple free throws. Really, though, the gritty stuff. Diving the floor for loose balls, going after rebounds, getting tips, those kinds of things. Really, really important out of him. And then last but not least, Milos Uzan. Welcome back, buddy. It's been a couple solid games in a row out of him. 33 minutes, 16 points, just 3 assists to 2 turnovers, which is different for him than last year. He's playing a different role than he was last year. I think that's worth pointing out as well. Really, really good to see him coming on. When all 3 guards, Flemings, Uzan, and Sharp, are over 15 points, 20, 16, and 16 today, that's going to be really, really hard for other teams to match up with because they can't poke all the holes in the dam, right? And so really, really impressed by the outing today. I did think they'd win today. I thought they'd beat the spread. I didn't think they'd beat the drum like they did necessarily. We're bringing things down throughout the week, so make sure you subscribe to the bell so you know when things go live. Thanks for making Locked On Cougs the first listen post-game or the first listen next morning or anywhere in between. Hit subscribe. Help us get to be, we're the most listened to Houston Cougars podcast out there. We're trying to grow and get bigger than that. So we're going to keep on growing and doing the thing like that. Locked On Cougs, the primary Locked On podcast network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.